about 3 or 4 years ago, there was a real feeling in offshore wind. If you'd worked in oil and gas, it was almost seen as a black mark against your name. That mood's changed. There's more and more appreciation of the experience. We still work in oil and gas, but if we can then help to transition that into the renewables, we would see ourselves enabling that transition. I set up Turnham for it to be challenging, interesting, fun, and hopefully along the way we'd make some money. We start these companies to get away from all the big company nonsense. And then you start your own company and you start to need a lot of the big company nonsense. You don't start a company like this if you're not, to a certain extent, a bit of a control freak. I'd like to think I'm self-aware enough to recognise that.
Why do you think control freaks end up starting companies so often? Hello and welcome back to Clean Talk, the podcast shining a spotlight on inspiring companies within the renewable sector and the people making them happen from the inside. I'm Luke. I run a video agency called Harmer Visuals. Today I'm joined by Mark Finch from Turn Energy, and we're going to be exploring a little bit about his company and his career background as well. Mark, thanks so much for joining me on the show.
Thanks, Luke. Thanks for inviting me.
So Mark, what drew you to a career in engineering?
As a kid, I was always interested in problem solving. Lego, I loved playing with Lego, I still do. I like building things, I like being outside, so I was drawn to engineering. And so after school, I went to Manchester University to do civil engineering. I hadn't been great at school, to be fair. I'd just scraped through on everything I'd done. School didn't really engage me, and then I happened to get to Manchester and somehow managed to fall into something that I turned out to be relatively good at. So really enjoyed engineering. Manchester at that time, this was the late 80s, so it was all Stone Roses and the Smiths and Happy Mondays, and had a great time socially. But Manchester at that time was known for geotechnical engineering soils, particularly offshore soils, and I got drawn into that. It was just something I was very interested in.
What did it look like getting drawn into that? Was it reading up on it? Was it speaking to people, going to events?
There was a lot of courses on geotechnical engineering at Manchester, so I took all those that I could. My tutor that I had, that was his specialism as well. Just something that I really got involved in, found that I was quite good at, really started to enjoy.
Tell me a little bit more about geotechnical engineering and what that encompasses.
So it's everything about the soil and the interaction of anything that sits on the soil or in the soil. So foundations, for me, everything I've ever done has been offshore. So I've not done any onshore construction at all. It's all been offshore. So it's been things like oil and gas platforms, pipelines, now, recently for the past 20 years, offshore wind, offshore wave and tidal, dredging, building artificial islands, anything offshore that sits on the seabed.
What have you found in all of your jobs? Common themes, common skills required, strengths required?
So the first job I got out of university was working for a company called Fugro, who do surveys of offshore sites. So for me, as a geotechnical person, taking samples of the seabed and then analysing them. So I spent a long time, I was there for 3 years, and I spent a long time going offshore on vessels. It all sounds very glamorous when you talk about it now. I worked in Hong Kong, I worked in Russia, I worked in Argentina, Africa. But not so glamorous. You fly to a port, you get on a boat, and off you go. It's either warm or it's cold. But yeah, travelled all over the world, saw a lot of places, to be fair. Got the actual experience of what the offshore soil looks like. I think that was priceless experience. It's a young man's game, I guess, because I was probably away in 3 years. I was probably away from home 2.5 years.
Wow.
And then from Fugro, I moved to a company called Brown & Root, now KBR, that do design, at that time, large offshore oil and gas structures. So pile designs, foundation designs, gravity-based designs, pipeline work. I was there, based in London for 4 or 5 years, really enjoyed that. Got the opportunity with Brown & Root to do some work in Africa. Went to Congo, did some work there. Then from Brown & Root, I learnt about big designing of large structures and installing large structures. Went offshore a lot, things were installed, so I got the practical experience there. And then I was offered a job in Aberdeen for 3 months or so, and I was there for 25 years. So I got a job working in the subsea sector in Aberdeen, which was less about platforms, more about subsea structures and pipelines and things like that are tied back to platforms. Worked for a French company called Coflexip Stena Offshore that are now Technip. Had a good couple of years in Paris, which was good. I got transferred to Paris to work on a project that was in Canada, the Terra Nova project. Spent a long time in Newfoundland as part of that project. So learned there I'd reached a stage where I had a team of engineers working for me, 5 or 6 guys. And then from Coflexip, I moved to a small consultancy that were setting up in Aberdeen. They were based in London, called HydroSearch, that were then bought and became the RPS Group. There's an awful lot of that in my career. Places where I've worked are now called other things because they've been acquired. Worked for HydroSearch. I set up an office for them in Aberdeen. So consultancy, very different thing in a way. You're just selling advice to people rather than working for Brown and Root and Coflexip was designing things and installing things for big contractors. And so at HydroSearch, I learnt there was a lot more interaction with clients, a lot more outward-facing work, a lot more. We had to build the business and sell the business, market the business. Worked there for a few years, and then me and a couple of colleagues who had worked at Brown and Root decided to set up our own company, doing the same kind of things, geotechnical consulting for offshore. And we set that company up in 2004. We called that company Isis Energy back in the day when it was acceptable to call something Isis Energy. Isis being the
Egyptian god?
Egyptian earth goddess, yeah. And also the name of the Thames that flows through Oxford. And Oxford at that time was probably the world centre for research into offshore geotechnical things.
Excellent.
None of us had gone to Oxford, but it didn't hurt to be associated with it. And we ran that company for 3 years, and it was in Aberdeen and in Bath. We had an office in Bath down here. And it was just at the start of the oil and gas boom. So 2004, 5, 6 was a huge boom in oil and gas before the crash of 2008. So we were very lucky in that sense. I'm sure we'll look back now and say, oh, it was all planned and we set up at the right time. That's not true at all. And then Isis was bought by a company called Senergy in Aberdeen in 2007. And then Senergy eventually got bought by Lloyd's Register in 2012 or 13. So there was a couple of sale events there, which, to be fair, we did quite well from. I stayed with Lloyd's for a bit, and again, Lloyd's was consulting, but on a much larger scale. At Isis, there was 3 of us. We had all of the experience of starting the company and finding work and all the invoicing and the marketing and all the stuff that goes into startup. Went very well. It was a relatively small company. Even when it was sold, we only had 4 employees. Worked for Lloyd's, and then in 2016, I decided to do it all again and set up Turnen Energy just by myself at that stage to specifically go and work in the offshore wind industry. So I was seconded into a project based in Edinburgh, the Inchcape offshore wind project. Did that for a number of years, but quite quickly after I'd set up Turnen, people were contacting me, asking me, oh, can you do this? Can you do that? We've got some work on this project. We've got some work on that project. And through a series of coincidences, we started to employ people, and we got 1 person and 2 people and more work. And 7 years down the line, there's best part of 20 of us. We've got 4 offices now. We're still headquartered in Aberdeen because that's where I was from. I moved to the Scottish borders 4 years ago just because that's where my wife's from, and 7 or 8 people in Aberdeen. We now have an office in Oxford and an office in Chichester, just outside Southampton. Yeah, it's been a blast with Turnen. I mean, hard work. We've set it up from the ground up. We started with a blank sheet of paper, but it's purely consulting again. So we do probably 80% of our work would be offshore wind.
Yep.
We still do oil and gas work. We do offshore wave, offshore tidal, subsea cables.
Excellent.
I mean, it's all offshore stuff. But so, yeah, it's been, 33 years gone past in the blink of an eye.
You mentioned the companies that you've worked at in the past, many of which being acquired by other companies. What's the scene like for growing companies in the renewables sector? Do the big giants come and eat you up fairly fast?
I guess it depends what you do. I mean, we're sat here in the Empire offices on O'Calwell. What we do in geoscience is a very niche thing. It's a very specialist thing. So there's few of the big developers have dedicated geoscience teams. Some of them do. The Orsteds do. The RWEs do. You know, there's one or two other people kicking around in other places, but it's very much a specialist thing. So yeah, I think there is a lot of acquisition goes on. I mean, we're still 7 years out and we're completely independent still.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's still quite a young market, despite the fact that I was first involved in offshore wind in probably 2004, in the first round of the UK offshore wind. So yeah, I think a lot of companies are feeling their way around, and there's acquisition going on. There's almost a constant discussion. I'm sure companies like Empire are the same, but there's almost a constant sort of informal chat with people about, oh, it might make sense if we join up with you or join up with them, or that's just been going on for years.
Yep.
It hasn't come to anything, but the offshore wind market's a fascinating market to be in.
And I suppose with any sector that's just riddled with innovation, coming up with new solutions and partnering with people is just kind of part and parcel with what you're doing, isn't it? You're breaking new ground all the time.
If you'll pardon the pun. To be fair, the offshore geotechnical world is probably not as innovative as maybe the structural guys or the turbine guys or the cables. I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it, but we're just fixing things to the seabed.
Sure.
I mean, yes, there's some innovation, but essentially for us, the reason why we've found it so easy to transition from oil and gas to offshore wind is that for us, it's just essentially the same thing, fixing something to the seabed. So I don't want to play down the innovation. There has been a lot of innovation in design methods with the PISA method and things like this, but it's a more universal application discipline. It's a more, sooner or later, all these things, floating wind turbines, whatever, they've all got to be fixed to the seabed. So it makes no difference to us in a way. If it's an oil and gas platform, an offshore wind turbine, a wave machine, a cable, a pipeline, an artificial island, it's all got to sit on the seabed.
Does that affect the way that you, I don't know how much of it you engage with, but on a PR front, a lot of the public facing marketing for the renewable sector is about change and sustainability and ethics.
That's a really interesting point, because about 3 or 4 years ago, there was perhaps 5 years ago, there was a real feeling in offshore wind that if you'd worked in oil and gas, they didn't want to know.
Right.
It was a very separate thing. It was almost seen as a black mark against your name, almost, dirty industry, a dying industry. I mean, to sidetrack a bit, I've got 4 kids, but I've got 2 older kids that are now 23 and 21. So they were born in Aberdeen, went through the school system in Aberdeen, wouldn't be seen dead working in oil and gas. I mean, just wouldn't. Just an absolute old industry, dying industry, dirty industry. No. So they're doing computer science and philosophy, but that's a long thing. So there was a period of time where we were almost playing down our offshore oil and gas credentials.
Okay.
To the point of we had 2 CVs. So you had a CV for an oil and gas job, and you had a CV for an offshore wind job. But obviously, a lot of my experience, a lot of my training has been in oil and gas, but it is directly transferable. That mood's changed, absolutely. So there's more and more appreciation of the experience, and we're fully committed to the energy transition, and that's by taking our experience we learned from oil and gas and using it in offshore wind or offshore tidal. But yes, we still work in oil and gas because my personal view is there has to be a transition. So we would see ourselves enabling that transition.
Sure.
I mean, yes, it has to transition, and by its very definition, they're non-renewable energy sources, so they have to fade out. But if we can then help to transition that into the renewables, that's where the value sits for me. But
Yeah, and I think that's a lot more of a pragmatic approach than just thinking of the stigma of, oh, it's oil and gas. Actually, if they're going to transition, they're going to need support at the tail end of their current
yeah,
workflow.
and this could be a whole new podcast in its own right, the whole politics of the whole new fields or the banning of the new fields. I mean, I won't get into that, but if we can help to transition away from fossil fuels into renewables, that's one of the central tenets of what we're trying to do.
Let's talk about the transition many engineers face that go the entrepreneurial route from technical skill sets to commercial skill sets. What's your experience been of being a hands-on person and then moving into the world of running a business?
So I think to found your own business, and as an aside, I hate the E word, the entrepreneur word.
Okay.
I don't know why, but I hate it.
Glamorized, that's why.
Yeah, I'd rather call myself a founder, but
Okay.
which in itself is probably anyway. Yeah, it's that tension between I've got where I've got to because I'm relatively good at the engineering side. It's like if you work in a big company, you tend to get promoted up through the ranks because you're competent and good, to a point where you're no longer doing the things you were competent and good for, which is a bit frustrating. And for a long time at Turner, I was hands-on. I was doing a lot of the work. I was certainly reviewing and checking a lot of the work. But as the company grows and gets bigger and bigger and bigger, you have to do less and less of that.
Yes.
So yeah, that's a really interesting subject. Do you bring in people to do the non-technical stuff so I can stay doing the technical things? Do I try and balance the two, or do I step back and find good people, which is the route we've taken?
Okay.
Really found good people that can do the engineering, whilst I then become the managing director of the company, the public-facing part of the company. There's definitely a tension there, and I think that you don't start a company like this if you're not, to a certain extent, a bit of a control freak. I'd like to think I'm self-aware enough to recognize that, but there's a definite tension there in the sense that management, essentially, if you're not careful, is watching people do things slightly less well than you think you can do them. So it's building that culture within the company of engineers in general, and of course I count myself as part of this group. We're a bit of a strange bunch. Very logical, very solution orientated, very, some would say, pedantic. Great example of being an engineer, I suppose. If somebody calls me pedantic, I would take that as a compliment. Yeah, because there's nothing wrong with being right. But it's that. And again, I count myself as part of this group, but they're an odd bunch to try and manage in a small company.
Yes.
Because the things that engineers don't like is the commercial side, the BD side, the document, all the things that are absolutely essential to build a small firm. So that in itself is quite interesting. So I seem to spend, probably quite rightly, most of my time trying to kind of establish the culture of the company and trying to, there's certain people want to be engineers in a darkened room doing clever sums, come out twice a day and see the light. Whereas there's other people that do want to be a bit more involved and do the commercial thing, and it's trying to get that balance right. Some people get it, some people don't. It's taught me an awful lot about me, because I am, a self-confessed control freak. There's a really interesting story about James Comey, that used to be the FBI director under Trump, wrote a book recently, and I went to go and see him. He did a speaking tour. He came to Edinburgh, and somebody asked him what his most positive trait was. And he said, well, my most positive trait is probably my most negative trait as well. He said, I'm very decisive, but it's a very fine line between being decisive and impetuous. And he could have been talking about me. I mean, I'm not suggesting that I could be director of the FBI, but I'm very comfortable with making decisions on not a lot of information.
Right.
But you have to accept that a significant minority of those decisions might not be right.
Yeah.
You know, you've got about Barack Obama famously said that 51% is what he needs to know about a problem to make a choice.
Interesting.
Engineers tend to want to know 99.99%. So you can sit there forever. Of course, the longer you sit and stew on a problem, the more information you get. There isn't an end point. So it's that's the bit that I find most challenging and interesting and sometimes frustrating, when to make a decision about something, good or bad. You know, you're founding a company, leading a company, there's some very difficult choices you've got to make at times with people that, because we're a small firm, we're quite close.
Yeah.
You know, so it's quite hard to talk. These people are my friends, I guess, in that sense, because we're in a much smaller firm. So yeah, that's perhaps quite a long-winded way of saying the whole idea of an engineering consultancy, there's a natural tension there, which can be very positive, but can also not be quite so positive if you're not careful.
Why do you think control freaks end up starting companies so often?
People take that as a bad thing. Yeah, certain things need controlling. Yeah, so control freakery in a way, part of it's a positive trait. Why do people do it? I think we start these companies, and again, there's an irony coming here, to get away from all the big company nonsense, whatever that means. And then you start your own company and you start to need a lot of the big company nonsense. So you need to start to control things, timesheets and all the rest of it, and purchase orders and blah, blah, blah. I think we all start off these companies wanting them to be, you know, beanbags and skateboards and coffee machines and beer on a Friday and stuff. It's just not like that. So I think control freaks, we want to make it what we want to make it, you know, bend it to our will. But I think necessarily in that journey, there's things you need to do. When it was just two of us and we were turning over £200,000 a year, yeah, it was easy, you know, sit and chat to each other. Now there's 20 of us and it's 4.5 million. You can't do that on the back of a piece of paper. You have to have processes. And I constantly find myself sat in these meetings, be it with external HR consultants or accountants, or thinking, what are we doing? I set up Turnham for it to be challenging, interesting, fun, slightly strange word, but, you know, a fun place to work, an interesting place to work. And hopefully along the way, if we could get those three right, we'd make some money, which has worked out. But you need to constrain it. Control freaks want to do this because they want to control their environment and get the most out of it for them. The irony is, I think you very quickly realize it's quite hard to control. It's getting that balance right, that it is more about the sort of the culture, the essence, the ethos, the values. And the three values of Turnham that we live and die by are innovation, the independence, and the integrity. We really do believe in those. We're an independent company with no external shareholders. So we tell our clients the truth. You know, if we say we'll do something, we'll do it.
Yep.
We quite often walk away from work and say, no, you don't need us, you need these people, or you're wasting your time doing this piece of work. What you really need is that piece of work. And I'm a great believer in, yeah, we've walked away from hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of work, but I'm a great believer in what goes around comes around.
Yep.
And people tend to respect that and go, okay, fair enough. It turns out to be the right advice, I hope. The integrity is, yeah, do the right thing, tell the truth. Independence. Most of our competitors, such as they are owned by much larger corporations. So they're perhaps a bit more geared towards what their larger parent company wants them to do. And the innovation that, and everybody talks about innovation, it's a word that's thrown around all over the place. In its most simplest form, for me, it's that, you know, you hear the phrase, well, that's the way we've always done things. You know, that's
Right.
the point at which I'll go, no, stop.
The innovation killer.
If that is the right way and best way, fine, let's do that. But if it's not, let's try and look at it from different angles and stuff. So we've got a very hybrid way of working. You don't have to be in the office 2 days a week or 3 days a week or 4. You can be in the office whenever you want to be in the office. You can work at 2 in the morning if you want. You can work on Christmas Day if you want. It's not, as long as you're not impacting anyone else or the general project deadlines and things. But that in itself becomes, it's not a problem, but it's something else that needs to be managed. Ternan Energy is a integrated geoscience company. Again, integrated is a word that's thrown around all over the place. You know, for me, so we've got geotechnical people, we've got geophysicists, engineering geologists, geomorphologists. What we're trying to do is bring all these opinions to the table and come up with the right solution for your job.
Yeah.
Whatever that might be. In certain cases, that might be that we're advising less work or different work, but I do honestly believe that if we do the right thing, then it will come round again and we'll get repeat business and all the rest of it. And so, yeah, we will never, ever criticize our competitors. Absolutely not. That's the integrity piece. I think it's really important because no one's out there trying to do the wrong thing. We hear a lot of other people criticizing other, you know, you won't hear that from Ternan because we're all trying to do our best.
How, for Ternan, as an independent service provider, do you fit into that sort of ethos of collaboration in the sector?
I'm a great believer in a rising tide lifts all boats. The offshore geoscience world's quite a small world, so we're very well known. I've got a very big network. I'm constantly trying to help other people. I'm not the world's best geotechnical person, but I probably do have one of the strongest networks of peers that are in the industry. So if I need something or want something, I can find it, I can get the advice. Likewise, anybody can call me at any time.
What does the average project look like for you? And this is...
For Ternan?
Yes. And the word average is proving difficult with engineers.
Mean, median. The average project for us now, because obviously it changes through the years, you get larger things. For us now, probably the average project would be a ground model, say, where you're building a ground model of an area based on data you've got, and you build a ground model about the soil strata and the layers and the rock and things. It would be maybe £100,000. That would be a 3-month project or so. We'd probably have a couple of those going on at the time. We do foundation engineering. We've probably got a few of those studies going on, which are probably, 20, 30, 40, 50 grand at a time. A bit shorter. We do work for other large companies like Kent or Empire or where we supply them with geotechnical expertise or soil springs for their foundation designs. So it's hard to pin down a typical project for us because we're doing so many things. And then on top of that, I do a lot of expert witness work, which is a bit of it's almost like a side hustle to what we do. It's very lucrative, it's very well paid, but it takes up a lot of time.
Talk me through what expert witnessing is.
So it's typically a developer, a wind farm developer or an oil and gas company who are in a dispute with a contractor that's been building something and it's taken longer or their tools haven't performed, or one of the big reasons why subsea offshore projects go wrong is unforeseen ground conditions.
Okay.
Because surveys can only be so good and you take a certain amount of soil samples. Soil can be highly variable. It can behave in strange ways. So it's often, sometimes the case that people go offshore and try and install things and things go wrong. The ground it's often the problem. There's often some real claims about unforeseen ground conditions,
right?
But it's also a very easy thing to claim.
Interesting.
Because there's a limited, so people can often rush to the unforeseen ground conditions thing when so it's when things like trenching tools haven't performed like you might expect them to, or piles have been harder or easier to drive and install. Things have sunk more than they're supposed to, and then you get big delays. So you've got big expensive vessels offshore, and if they're standing by for 2-3 days, 2-3 weeks, all of a sudden you've got multi-million-pound claims. So I'm brought in by lawyers, and they've got by that stage they tend to have a set of questions that the dispute revolves around.
Yeah.
And you're asked to give your expert opinion on these questions with all of the data that you're given, to give your expert opinion on what the impact might be on the project. So as an expert witness, you're there to help the arbitration. You're not there to help your side. You're supposed to be independent. You're not there to advocate for your side's position, even though you're being paid by your side.
Sure.
You're supposed to be independent. Our job is to advise the arbitration, which is typically 3 arbitrators. And they're the ones, when you actually get to the arbitration process and they're going through all the evidence. And so I typically write a report on what I've been asked to advise on based on the data that's there. That then gets passed to the other party, and I get their report. And then you write a response report to that. And then you meet with their expert. And the idea of that is you're trying to narrow down the questions that the dispute's about. Quite often there's 20 questions, and you go and have what's called the meeting of the experts, and you come out with 3 questions. And that's exactly what it's for, trying to shorten the arbitration time, trying to reduce the number of things that they're arguing about. Sometimes there's no reduction and you come out with the same amount of questions as you went in with. Then there's the actual hearing where you have to go, and then you're cross-examined on your reports by the other side's barristers. That's the stressful bit. And then there's a whole arbitration about that. There's other experts as well. There's typically a delay expert that work out how long the project should have taken if it had all worked well and there hadn't been a problem. Therefore, is the cost that's being claimed reasonable or too high? And then you have a quantum expert that actually works out costs based on those delays. So there's typically 3 experts: technical, delay, and quantum. And yeah, I've been doing that now for 15 years, and these things are I find them really interesting. It's very stressful when you get into the hearing and you're being cross-examined by these very, very clever King's Counsel guys that, but I quite like to be fair, the sort of the combative, is that the right word? Adversarial nature of it, but also there's quite a lot of theatre in it.
Interesting.
It's not necessarily about the strength of the technical argument. It's about how that's presented and how you focus on different bits of the case and try and build the whole case. And also, these arbitrations tend to take place in centres of arbitration, which are typically New York, London, Paris, Singapore, or Dubai. It's always in really nice boardrooms in posh hotels or in solicitors' offices overlooking the Palm in Dubai, or there's something very high class about it, which often in engineering, when I first talked about my work at Fugro on ships, it was on rusty, smelly ships that smell of chip fat out in Africa and things. It's a different thing, and I like it. So, not bad places to go and visit.
No.
There's a lot of people that do what I do, with my experience, that won't do the expert witness work because they find it too stressful. I don't know if it's because I'm a Yorkshireman or I quite like the whole
the grit of it.
They always advise you, if you're not asked a question, don't say anything. Just sit there and wait to be asked a question. And of course, what the other side's trying to do is engage you in a conversation. So you might say too much about what or more than you wrote down. I find it quite easy to actually just sit there and wait for them to say why or how or what.
What are some sort of wider use cases of an expert witness?
You can take and get formal qualifications. So I'm a certified expert witness. There's courses you can go through, which is about the actual mechanics of the law and the arbitration process and things. And I'm a member of the Academy of Experts, so you have to apply for that and show that you've been involved in things. But in general, the first time you get involved, it's just based on your experience you've had, I suppose, your presence in the market, your having been known for writing technical papers, perhaps, or speaking at conferences and I mean, that's how my first one came about. And it's a little bit, once you've done one, it's a lot easier to do the second one and then the third one. So I'm probably, I don't know, I've probably done 20 of these things in 15 years. So to me, it's very normal and straightforward. They all sort of follow the same process in a way. But yeah, it's been, my last one was last November.
What location was that?
Singapore. That was power cables that were installed between Malaysia and Singapore across the Johor Straits, and the arbitration was in Singapore. The one before, and I did two in Singapore in the space of about 6 weeks, just because of how the arbitration schedule fell. And then prior to that, I'd done 3 or 4 in Dubai. There's an element of it as well. It's nice to be recognized as an expert, whatever that means.
Yeah.
They expect a lot of you, but engineers, I think, will quite often complain about not being listened to. I have no problem with giving advice to a client of ours. I have no problem with them listening to it and saying, no, I'm going to do this. Absolutely. It's their money. It's their thing. Fine. The thing which frustrates engineers is when you're not listened to at all. You know, there's a thing. It's go, yeah. Last time we did this, blah, blah, blah. But as an expert witness, you're very there. The side is relying upon your expertise, and to a certain extent, from a self-esteem point of view, they've chosen you as their expert. Yeah, it's quite nice. Yeah, because that's not something that is that common in an engineering profession.
You used the word theatre for it. I was quite intrigued by that word.
Yeah, the barristers and lawyers are. It's a performance. It's they're very clever people, but they have a way of trying to thread the narrative through the case, trying to draw you off. The thing they love to do is try and get under your skin and get you annoyed. I've seen very esteemed, well-known geotechnical experts get very, very annoyed and a bit shouty. But some people are better at being challenged than others. I've seen some very esteemed people slip into the how very dare you question what I'm saying. For me, I quite like the argument. I suppose there's a part of me, and again, I keep going back to the Yorkshire thing. I'm not sure, but I'm also the youngest of 4 sons. So there's, I'm quite good at a good argument. Quite like all that. But yeah, I quite like the theatre of it, the formal structure of it. There's something very satisfying being asked back by the same companies. So I've worked for the same law firms quite a few times, quite often. It's always nice when people get... So what I always say at Turner is, it's all well and good winning a new client first time. What really impresses me is when that client comes back again. Because they've seen what we do. Yes, it's good getting new work, but I much prefer the repeat business, because that talks to our values. Yeah.
It's time for what we call quickfire curiosity. What's been your most unexpected learning from your engineering career, and how has it shaped your view of the world on a more existential level?
After 30 odd years, to start to recognise that I'm actually quite good at what I do. To find something that I'm quite good at and I enjoy doing. I'm constantly amazed that we've got this thing called Turnen that's going and is going, relatively well, and is turning a profit and is paying the mortgages of 15, 16 people, whatever. And that's what fires me up. That's what makes me think, Yeah, we've got hands on something now.
When the penny just drops.
Yeah, and it happens like twice a day, 3 times a day. And at times when I'm sat there at 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday night and it's all grim and we're trying to sort things out and we're perhaps a bit late on a project and we're really trying to pull together, it's not great then. And as I say, we've got 4 kids. I have spent a lot of time away from home and, a very supportive wife and all the rest of it. And that's quite tough at times. But, I found something that I love doing, that I'm quite good at, that seems to benefit the world, if that's not too tree huggy with the offshore renewables thing. It's
You're providing value.
For a working class boy from Leeds, I'm quite pleased. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you underplay it quite a lot. To say that you think that you're quite good at what you do after.
It's not for me to judge, and if my 3 brothers were here now, they'd be putting me in my place. But yes, I found something that I like doing, that I'm good at, that has a purpose. That I'm very lucky. Yeah, very, very privileged to have. And I'm not a big believer in luck. I'm a believer in you make your own luck by being in the right place at the right time. But perhaps that's what people that have been lucky say. Eh? I don't know. But if somebody said, and they do say quite a lot, and I'm quite surprised it hasn't come up, but how did you end up doing that? All I've got is the creation story of the playing with Lego. I don't know. What takes you on a path to, quite often I've moved from company to company by meeting people in a pub, perhaps chatting to them.
Wow.
Turns out they've got something to. I mean, my slightly odd, amusing story is that I've never had a proper interview for a job. It's always been people that I know that I've met. So even when I got my first job at Fugro, it's because my tutor at university, one of his good friends ran the Fugro office, and I happened to be at his house. And this guy was there, and we went to the pub, and it was just at the right time, and they had some vacancies. I was looking for something to do. And then Brown and Root, it was a guy that I'd met working for Fugro and all the rest of it. Things just seem to... There's times in your life when things align. We live in the Scottish borders now. I mean, if you told me 20 years ago that I was going to live in the Scottish borders, I said, well, where's the Scottish borders? Stuff aligns, and I'm without getting too spiritual
Go as
about
spiritual
it.
as you want.
Yeah, not too spiritual about it, but stuff's meant to happen, eh? And it happens. It's so yeah. Sorry, that's not a very quick-fire answer to
That's
a
all right.
quick-fire question.
Would you consider yourself a futurist?
What do you mean by futurist?
I would prefer you to define it
Yes.
for me.
I thought you might. I suppose yes. I suppose you'd have to say yes, because we're looking to the future. We're constantly looking for paths or roads to growing things, to improving things, to establishing things in a work sense. In a personal sense, well, as I say, we've got 4 kids, so you've got to be a futurist in that sense. They're all incredibly different. So yeah, I would hope so. I do have my moments of back in the good old days, and salty sea dog stories and things, but I try and snap out of that as quickly as I can. But I guess I'd say yes, because tomorrow's gone. You've got to look forward.
How have your career ambitions changed over time?
I'm not sure I've ever had an ambition in my career. I'm always amazed. I've got a couple of really good friends who are same kind of age as me, not in this business, and they're full of 5-year plans and 10-year plans, and I haven't got a 10-minute plan. I'm more of a one for let's just see how it goes.
Reactive.
I'm not sure reactive. Probably just the wrong side of impetuous. Just that, and I mean, of course you have to. I'm making light of it. Of course, there has to be a plan for turning. Yeah, we sit down. We've got a 3-year plan. All that. But personally, I'd kind of much rather just dive in and have a go, and see where things take me. And it seems to the number of times, again, not to get too spiritual, but the number of times when it's looked a bit, gosh, we need some more work, or it's a bit bleak, or what's going on here, and then something happens I meet somebody that I know at a conference and they go, oh, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? I meet Cal from Empire, and all of a sudden you've got a similar sized company with similar sized problems. After 32 years, it's about legacy, I guess. That sounds a bit grand, but what are people? I'd like people to look back and go, oh yeah, that turning thing was all right. There was something. I'm personally not doing it for the financial gain of it now. It's about, I don't know, doing the right thing. Does that make sense? This thing supports a lot of people. Does some good stuff, and hopefully, as and when we move, because eventually I will have to either step out of it, or they'll sell it, or pass it on to somebody, or I'd just like to look back at it and go, yeah, it was all right. Yeah, it meant something. Yeah, so if that's my way of putting my mark on the world, which is maybe quite limited in an engineering sense, but it's something. So I'm quite proud of that. Yeah, I'm not a fan of being proud, but yeah,
building something, having a purpose outside of just financial gain.
Mm-hmm.
For me, building a video business, it's been that thing of, can I create something? Can I grow something that's beyond just myself?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah.
As an engineer, how much more sort of integral is that to you as someone who builds things by virtue of their interest anyway?
It is important, and I think because a consultancy by its nature is quite ethereal. We don't own anything. We don't build anything. We've got a group of people, a few laptops in an office, and a list of email addresses, a little bit of IP. But yes, it's important that so I suppose we build the brand. We build the reputation. The thing that I talk to the team about an awful lot is it's all about reputation. We're only as good. It's a very fragile thing, consulting. You're only as good as your last job. You're only as good as what people think you are. We can think we're the best people. It's very easy for us to get carried away that our part of the world is really, really important. Of course, it is to us, but maybe not to people that are trying to build wind farms and things. We're just one small part of a huge thing. We're doing something of use together that benefits the people that are in Turnen, but benefits wider society, I hope.
You're face to face with your younger self. You can give one piece of advice on career trajectory. What do you say?
Don't worry about it. When I was younger, I had a terrible stammer, or very bad, to the point of I couldn't really communicate that well. Up to the point that I went to university, and I had and again, serendipity, whatever. I went to the health centre at the university health centre with an ear infection or something. Anyway, my speech was appalling at that stage, really, really bad. It just so happened the doctor that I saw, her sister ran the speech therapy department of the university, and I got involved in it, and that turned my life around. So I guess if I could see my younger self, I go, just don't worry about it. Just lean into it and just look for the opportunity. Just stuff. So my two kids in their 20s, they're in a hurry to do something. Stuff's got to be right. It's got now, and they've got to get the job, and they've got to do this, and they've got to do that. I go, you're 23. Don't.
You don't have to have it all together.
And I know at 23, 25 seems like an eternity away. But in your 50s, when you look back, so I'd say, just lean into it. It'll be okay.
Mark, thank you so much for your time. It's been
thank you.
A pleasure, again, speaking to another engineer. Your story's inspiring, and both on the front of engineering, being an expert witness, founding a company, it's really engaging and really interesting to hear. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll be back with another episode shortly, so we'll see you in the next one.